Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and kick off the workshop number one then. And first of all, I wanted to just say I appreciate General Beaupaire's comments this morning. We heard a lot of great things, those of us in the Civil Affairs Proponent and Capability Managers Division. And we hope that this session will support and reinforce the challenges that he presented to us. And I'm sure Chris Holshek already picked up on this, but I particularly liked General Beaupaire's characterization of winning without fighting as victory before war. And I think our branch motto, secure the victory, also adequately applies to that description. Also, before I get started, I wanted to thank the Civil Affairs Association for allowing me to be part of the review panel for the papers that will be presented tomorrow. As I went through them, I saw a lot of great ideas for consideration by policymakers, the operational force, and those of us in the institutional and generating force. So I look forward to those being reviewed tomorrow and then ultimately published as issue papers. So to get started, and everybody on the panel is, their bios are in the bio summary, so I won't introduce them again in the interest of time, but you can see their bios there. And once again, this panel allows us in the proponents, the Joint Army, Marine Corps, and NATO CIMIC proponents to provide an update on what has occurred in our institutions since we last presented in the Civil Affairs Roundtable in April. And of course, I've asked each of the panel members to do their best to focus on the theme of civil affairs, a force for winning without fighting. And you should see my slide 2, which is the list of those who are presenting. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Colonel Baker and Colonel Sisk could not be present today. They had prepared, but then one thing or another came up last minute. But fear not, as your facilitator, I will fill in for them. I have some notes to present in their absence, and then you can see that I will be followed by Major Retired Al De Vera, then Colonel Liddick from PKSOI, Aaron Weiss from the Marine Corps Civil Affairs community, and then, as always, pulling up the rear, but with a very important message, will be Lieutenant Colonel Stefan Muehlich from the CIMIC Center of Excellence. So, to start off, the main effort that the Joint Proponent is working on that relates to our theme today is the rewrite of US SOCOM Directive 525-38 on civil military engagement. And I think General Beaupaire spoke a lot to what soft civil affairs forces do in competition. And this particular directive outlines their role. It provides definitions, concepts, guidance, and assigns responsibilities for the support and conduct of the US SOCOM Civil Military Engagement Program of Record. Now, SOCOM policy requires the directives and policy memorandums to be reviewed and updated every 2 years. And you can see this one was last published in 2018, so it's a little bit overdue. But the second bullet here is a direct quote from the current version. And the sentence right after this, right following this, it goes on to say the CME program increases the capability of US government supported IPI, let me think about what it is. Indigenous populations and institutions, reduces the influence of malign actors within targeted countries and leverages civil vulnerabilities and resiliencies within the operational environment in support of theater and country plans and strategies. Now, CME is conducted by theater and country level civil military support elements that have a reach back or reach forward relationship with a CONUS-based operational support network provided by the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade and its theater-aligned battalions. Civil affairs soldiers execute all of the CA core competencies and mission sets of civil affairs operations outlined in FM 3-57, particularly in the areas of building relationships and identifying and leveraging local capabilities and resources against local, national, and strategic challenges during competition. At any given time, about 30 to 40 or more civil military support elements may be operational in as many countries across the globe, with a presence in every theater except for NORTHCOM. By all reports from the theaters where they operate, the CME program offers a great return on investment in those theaters and countries when it comes to working with our partners to counter malign influence during competition, which is a very important activity that supports winning without fighting or victory before war. So that's the primary effort at the Joint Proponent. Moving on to the Civil Affairs Capability Manager Division, where I work and where I work very closely with Colonel Sisk. The top part here shows our current 5 priorities, and we work towards and on these priorities on a daily basis. But again, to focus on the near-term efforts that are related to our theme. In the area of policy development, we are working closely with the organizations listed here. Again, you see ASD SOLIC, PKSOI, which Pete Griffith mentioned, Headquarters DA, SOCOM, and many other interagency partners. We're working with very closely with those organizations to ensure that current and future civil affairs capabilities are properly captured at the policy level. For example, some of those policies that we are very familiar with, the DoD Directive 2000.13. There's the Defense Support to Stabilization Guidance, something fairly new, the Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response Action Plan, which Colonel Liddick will get into, the CME program I just mentioned, and the Global Fragility Act implementation, just to name a few. In the area of concept development, Army concepts and the concept development process assists in identifying required capabilities and existing and evolving technology that Army forces could leverage in the future to achieve their objectives. Under a new Army concept framework, we see the Army Operational Concept 2040, which is currently being developed, and its new supporting documents. And these supporting documents include cross-functional annexes, or also known as CFAs, which are focused on, right now there's 3 of them that I'm aware of: decision advantage, protection and deception, and sustainment operations. There are also functional appraisements, which focus on the warfighting functions and supporting functions. And then there are future capability workbooks, which focus on the organizational structures and capabilities that the various organizations of the Army bring to operations. It basically is replacing what we used to know as the operational and organizational concepts, ONO concepts. All of these documents feed the Army experimentation and future force designs. And we are looking at ways to integrate ideas for the execution of governance and stabilization into these documents and into future experimentation events. That's one of the primary things we do in our division. On the next bullet, CASEL and what we call Project Convergence 22, PC22. We talked about the CASEL initiative in last year's symposium and at the last roundtable. We continue to make progress in documenting a process that leverages applied social, data, and learning sciences to address the social, political, economic, and cultural factors that influence populations through information dominance in great power competition, multi-domain operations, and irregular warfare. This initiative combines artificial intelligence, machine learning, and analytics with the civil affairs capabilities to provide decision makers a deep understanding of population centers for the intelligence, operations, and targeting processes. We made great strides recently by observing the 97th Civil Affairs Battalion and its CKI process last month during Project Convergence 22, working closely with Dr. Pete Griffith and his team from the Office of Analytics and at the Department of State's Bureau of Conflict Stabilization Operations. And we will be expanding that effort this year by observing use of KPOC units in some of their already planned training events. In the area of warfighters and other exercises, we're working closely with the operations group at Mission Command Training Program and with use of KPOC to develop the scenario and master scenario event list for the core warfighter at Fort Hood this coming April. You'll recall that Major General Coggins described use of KPOC's brigade command post exercise functional during the roundtable earlier this year. We're excited to see KPOC was able to provide its brigade CPXF with the Warfighter 23-4 this year, and basically conforming to one of General Beaupaire's challenges, where this gives us an excellent opportunity to exercise a brigade CA task force with subordinate CA battalions working in the corps and division rear area. And of course, with the elements of the 95th CA Battalion, CA Brigade also participating in the warfighting exercise, we'll be able to exercise SOF CFI3, integration, operation, and interoperability and interdependence. And we'll also see the civil military integration in action because multiple U.S. government agencies will also be there. So at this point, I will ask Dr. Walsh to provide a quick update on the USAR force design update, since he is the principal action officer on that. Dale, over to you.
Got it, Dennis. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
All right, Roger, good. Good morning, everyone. As Dennis has written on the slide there, the new structure that we're proposing aligns with the new core competencies and the Army 2030 and 2040 objectives. The U.S. Army Civil Affairs formations are not optimally manned, trained, organized, or equipped currently to plan and conduct civil affairs operations in support of Army and Joint Force commanders from the tactical to the strategic level to meet mission requirements of the future operational environment. Nor are they optimally manned, organized, and equipped to plan, direct, and conduct civil knowledge integration, civil network development and engagement, military government operations, and civil military integration. As you know, the last comprehensive redesign of the U.S. Army Reserve CA force structure was FTU 0501, which is almost 18 years ago. And that was approved and resourced in TAA 08 to 13. And after more than 15 years of continued evaluation of this structure, we've identified capability and capacity gaps in executing command and control, civil information management, and functional specialist tasks, primarily at the KCOM brigade and battalion levels. And also, the proposed structure captures constructs that we've identify and target capability and capacity gaps from the 2019 CA Force Mod assessment. So all that being said, as Dennis said, it adds new operational capacity to all our civil affairs units and aligns with Army 2030 and 2040 objectives, with the division as a tactical unit of execution in large-scale combat operations. It also includes establishment and realignment of key capabilities and capacity to execute our new CA core competencies and gain efficiencies in information sharing, intelligence, operations, and targeting functions. The FDU redesigns existing structure and adds new capabilities and capacity at the company level, battalion level, brigade level, and KCOM levels. At the company level, primary changes are increase in CA team size and company size and lieutenant allocation or authorizations at the team level. At the battalion level, the functional specialty cells and civil information management cells are dissolved, and we have established military government teams and civil knowledge integration cells. At the brigade level, also functional specialty cells, civil information management cells are dissolved, and we've established these military government teams and civil knowledge integration centers. At the KCOM level, that's where we saw the most change. We've again, eliminated the functional specialty cells, civil information management cells, but we've also established current operations sections, future operations sections, and influence effects and inform effects sections. And that helps get after the whole information, I can't remember, information dominance that the KCOM commander, the KPOC commander was pursuing. So again, forgive the quick verbiage, but bottom line, we're addressing, this gets after General Beaupaire's question of what does a CA force of 2030 look like? What a CA force of 2030 looks like, it will be able to mitigate and address those gaps in operational requirements that we've identified in the future operational environment and give our force the necessary force structure to get after their core competencies. Over.
Thanks, Dale. So in closing from the Civil Affairs Capability Management Division, I hope it's clear that all the activities we discussed this morning help us build a civil affairs force that is capable of working with others to secure the victory and win without fighting. So I'll move on to the branch proponent representative, Major Al DeVera. Al.
Well, yes, good morning. Can you hear me, Dennis?
I can now. You're good to go.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak on behalf of the CA proponent. The current CA proponent that's got the lead for training development, leadership, education, and personnel and doctrine is Lieutenant Colonel Sal Candela. The division of which I'm the current supervisor for has five uniformed personnel and 5 very experienced authors and doctrine developers assigned to it. Going into the next slide, I'd like to highlight the current doctrines that we have under development. Very, very busy slide, but what I just wanted to the community to see out of this slide is that all the doctrine that we have under development is embedded and nested within all strategic, operational, and tactical documents, starting from the national security strategy, going down to current concepts which have been experimented, which is multi-domain operations, and has been codified into the new version of FM3-0 operations. FM3-57, which we published in July of 2021, was one of the outcomes of the force modernization assessment, was a recommended solution, which we've already codified. And that has created a ripple effect in updating all the Army Technics publications that we have assigned to us, to include GTAs. Currently, we have 8 Army Techniques publications, or ATPs. All of them will require an update due to the new FM3.0. Of note, ATP 3-57.30, that's your civil network development and engagement. That one is currently at the Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate at Fort Leavenworth. Anticipate that being published and up on the Army publication site in 3 to 4 weeks. ATP 3-57.40, that's our transitional governance ATP. That's currently an author's draft, and we anticipate that getting a worldwide staffing around the March timeframe of next year. ATP 3-57.50, civil knowledge integration, that is also in an author's draft currently, and that will probably be out for worldwide staffing in the February timeframe. ATP 3-57.60, that's civil affairs planning, another recommended directed solution off the FMA. That should be in worldwide staffing in the January timeframe of next year. ATP 3-57, SIBMIL integration. Okay, so right now it'd probably be the .70. That one we'll hold off on that one until FY 2024 timeframe to go into that. And then ATP 3-57.80, that is the RSOF Civil Affairs. That one currently in author's draft, getting ready to transition into initial draft. That will go into initial staffing, potentially also in the January timeframe. Those were all mentioned by General Beaupere. You know, in the questioning, a lot of the questions, which was very invigorating in the previous session. If these are all aligned with 3.0, yes, they are all in line, and we are getting to get them all in line with 3.0. Fortunate for us, FM 3-57, our foundational manual for civil affairs, already had all the hooks for multi-domain operations, simply because the guiding principle when FM 3-57 was being written, we already had the Army operating concepts for multi-domain operations. So we knew we had to establish those hooks early on. So very good and beneficial for us that we don't have to do a heavy lift in aligning the multi-domain tasks. GTAs will all follow subsequently as a second priority, and those ones, some of them will be coming out in 2023, and then the rest will come in 2024. Next slide, please. All right, some of the doctrine initiatives that we have for this year, FM 357, the new one, getting into its 18th month since publication. The request for feedback, that's going to be going out to the force in April of 2023. Of course, also select officers will also get a cut and an opportunity to provide feedback on how that's being used at the CTC centers, as well as operationally from the force. Some of the immediate feedbacks that I'm getting is that they're happy. The force is happy with the manual. Simply because, like, you know, this is already what civil affairs was executing well over a decade. We just needed to codify it so that it actually gets the force resources that I had difficulty trying to justify in a previous versions of the FM. Army and Joint Doctrine for Military Government. Okay, I think this was also a comment that was brought up in the previous session. For the mere fact that, you know, hey, where does state and USAID interagencies tie into military government? So this is a significant gap that unless you have a doctrine that addresses Army and Joint Doctrine for military government, you'll have different techniques and methods in actually engaging. So this was brought up at the last Civil Affairs Symposium at Fort Leavenworth in September. The director over there also said and reiterated, yes, Al, the hardest thing that our Army will have to execute is execute transition if it's not ready for our interagency partners to take over. All those consolidation of gains will be more difficult to attain if we don't have the capability within the uniformed services, not only Army, Marines, Air Force, Navy, unless we address military government. So working with PKSOI, Mission Command Center of Excellence, we'll work some recommendations on how we're going to go forward. My initial recommendation would be this might be a doctrine that would be best authored as an OPR at the PKSOI level or at Mission Command Center of Excellence with the Special Operations Center of Excellence and support. But I'm open to the discussion, of course, like, you know, throughout, you know, the remainder of the session. Campaign of learning, observations, and documenting CA elements executing the new Middle Core tasks of CNDE, transitional governance, civil knowledge integrations, and civil military integration. So the authors, of course, trying to, in an attempt to be relevant, will observe what's occurring at the CTCs, as well as engaging at symposiums, seminars at the GCC, the TSOC level. Some of the notes off the campaign of learning event was just about 3 weeks ago. I was at AFRICOM And one thing that was brought up there at the GCC level was civil affairs actually executes 40% of military activities on the continent. That was very surprising. And the mere fact that very seldom that we get the vignettes, the appropriate vignettes of those engagements. So we'll rectify that by engaging, of course, with operational force to ensure those sometimes classified vignettes actually make it up to us, so we can solidify them into doctrine or as learning vignettes that we could use at the CAQC course. Promoting the branch, this is also being executed as a new UFM, UATP goes out. These, and of course, like, off adult learning and multi-domain, many different ways to, to learn. We'd like to capitalize on the fact that these are already free services provided at Fort Leavenworth, and we'll capitalize those through audiobooks, videos, and productions through Army University Press to get it out to the force, because the force does have some questions on new doctrine, on how it applies to the way they operate, and we'd like to not only have it something that you're reading, but something they can visually see or hear. Next slide. Went that low down and dirty, but there's our contact numbers if there's persisting questions after this. Ben, your questions. Back to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Al. There are already some questions, but we'll entertain those at the end if that's okay. So now we'll move on to Colonel Jay Liddick up at PKSOI. Jay, your mic. Over.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Colonel Jay Liddick, for those who don't know me, I am a civil affairs officer. Been in the director seat here at PKSY for about 14 months. Those who aren't familiar with the organization, we execute the Army's responsibility down to TRADOC and CAC for joint proponency for stabilization and peacekeeping operations. We've, like every organization, have gone through some restructures over time. 2023 will be the 30th year of us being in existence, so we'll be celebrating that next year. But we're smaller than we were, as some may be familiar with, 7-8 years ago, but still much bigger than when we started. All told, about 20 personnel broken into 2 divisions, a stabilization division and a peace ops division. Given our size, I always tell our team we're too small to be focused and too big not to produce. So every single day we're looking at how do we move forward in ensuring that stabilization and peacekeeping operations are accurately reflected in policy, strategy, concepts, doctrine, training, education, leader development. As you can see, that's a big task, no small task, but really fortunate to be surrounded by a great team, people who are true experts and are committed to moving this forward, because undoubtedly the stabilization piece, it's not a matter of if, it's just when. And when we think of it broadly, and going back to the previous session, stabilization and consolidation of gains is done across the continuum. If you're not doing them before conflict with the aim of preventing conflict, then you can't hope to be struggle-free and transitioning post-conflict. So just some highlights. I got a lot of stuff on here. We're a very busy organization, but for everyone's essay, we just recently this year put out the new JP 307 on stabilization. That should be a tool for civil affairs practitioners. I recommend everyone go and familiarize yourself with that. Stabilization is a framework for civil affairs. FM 30, I just want to give another shout out to that. Just recently released with AUSA, a lot of great work by Colonel Retired Rich Creed, the CAD director, with the support of CA there at Fort Bragg. My organization contributed as well, but the carry on of the consolidation and gains piece is huge. And again, I recommend all the professionals on this forum go back and take a look at that, because CA has some really clarified roles in that, which are really important and are absolutely critical for our ability to consolidate gains. our organization is working in conjunction with SSI here at the War College to further do deep dive into consolidation gains across the continuum. And we look to present, and this is another SAP at the Land Power Symposium that will be at the Army War College in May of this coming year, as well as a more deep dive into the application in Indo-PACOM with presenting at the Land Pack seminar that same month in May. As Dennis and Dale alluded to, the PKSY is working with AFCC on the Army operating concept. We'll be working hand in hand with the CA capability manager. The work that's been done to this point, our aim is to make sure that stabilization and civil affairs is accurately represented in there. And as we're thinking about how that works in 2040, what are the resources and changes that need to occur? But a big part of that is just getting it written in correctly. And Dennis and Dale and the team and Kurt down there, they're all over it, and we're hand in hand with them on that. For everyone's essay as well, we just completed just executed and ended October 28th, the first full run of the Joint Interagency Stabilization Studies course. That's actually a typo on the thing, should say stabilization course. Unique course, only one in existence that brings together Department of State, USAID, and DoD personnel in a course. Long-standing gap in our ability to plan stabilization activities. This course is directly aimed to get after that. We right now are set to run two courses a year and 30 students per course. And the breakdown is 10 DoD, 10 USA, 10 Department of State. And this course was absolutely built and executed with PKSOI, CSO from state, and our USAID partners. Really great feedback on the execution of that. Obviously, it's targeted right now at getting folks at the GCC, ASC level planners and their parallel partners at Department of State and USAID into the course. As we expand, I see that going down to where we can reach out and touch people at core and division levels and KCOMs. But more to follow on that. Great course. We have some work to do to get it institutionalized so that the course just runs in perpetuity. GFA was mentioned. I've said this before, the Global Fragility Act, long-term stabilization money over 10 years, really the money going through Department of State. But I really think CA has a critical role in execution of this, the Global Fragility Act, and it's an opportunity for civil affairs capability, but it's also a huge opportunity for all of us in the stabilization realm. And it's another chance to take lessons we've learned and get it right in how we execute from a country team level with being appropriately understood and applied from a regional and GCC level as well. It was mentioned before that we just completed a defense support to stabilization framework tool. I literally have that in my inbox to put my signature on it, and then we'll be pushing that out. We'll be posting it on our website. That is a tool for practitioners that are working in the stabilization realm. Should give you a good handle on all the different pieces of policy and authorities that are applied to stabilization, and contact information as you're working through a problem set. Women, Peace, and Security. We are the Army OPR for Women, Peace, and Security, as well as protection of civilians. We're working through the process of implementing the U.S. government strategy for women, peace, and security. More to follow. I absolutely, when you look at the recommendations, civil affairs has a role in this as well. My stance on it has always been that women represent, 50 plus women and children represent 50+% of any population. So if we really understand the population, our analytical frameworks have to take into consideration the factors that are being looked at for WPS, and that flows right into the civilian harm mitigation and response. There's an action plan that's out now. This is SecDef driven. There'll be a center of excellence stood up for protection of civilians in the DC area. They're working through that right now with trying to get an IOC as early as March of 2023, led by an SCS. Again, this is another area where, I mean, my team is integrated into all 4 of the OPTs that are working this right now. There'll be a DODI coming out here soon on civilian harm mitigation and response. But civil affairs, huge role in it when you look at the analytical side in the CKI piece to understanding populations and potential impacts. So I think that's another opportunity piece. And I know Dennis, Kurt, and the team there are integrated and working that as well. So much more to follow as the Army is making in with DOD, because the Army will have responsibility for civilian harm as the overall OPR, currently working through that with FOC for the Center of Excellence and things to be really flowing in place by 2025. Moving on, UCOM, the Ukraine situation has again, I think, brought to the forefront that in large-scale combat operations, it's unavoidable that you're going to deal with the population-centric issues that result from it. We've been trying to be good team players with UCOM, providing them some support and analytical piece. We've also just supported AFRICOM, the TCAP there, on a week-long session that they did on looking at their area operation and all the activities that Civil Affairs was doing. Again, SA for practitioners, the Allied Joint Pub on stabilization 328. My organization was a lead for the rewrite on that. That is literally awaiting signature. So that will be another manual that'll be a useful tool for practitioners that literally should be released. I'm expecting it to be released in December, so we'll see. We've continued to work with the SFABs on providing them some MTT training on for the organizations that are going into countries with peacekeeping operations. Just executed the first pilot MTT last month there at Fort Bragg. Went really well. We'll continue to work closely with the SFABs. But USAJFKSWCS and SWCS, the fact is civil affairs is a central capability for U.S. government stabilization capability, military-wise. Working with Colonel Burnett and more work to do this as we go into the new year and solidifying the OIW proponency and stabilizations fit in there. The Castle work that Dennis briefed previously and Dale touched on, we're fully on board with that. Undoubtedly, to do, from my vantage point, to do stabilization, you have to understand the operational environment from a civilian population perspective. And when you broaden that out to stabilization, I know we have Dr. Pete Griffith on here, how we pull that all together and how we work it with Department of State and their IMAP program and USAID so that we have a true shared understanding. I think there's tremendous potential there, direly needed, and we're fully on board in supporting that. And as Al touched on, the 38 Golf and Governance Manual, again, two pieces that directly go back to our ability to do stabilization. PKSY is completely on board with working hand in hand with USAJFKS and SWCS on those two efforts. We're small, have to be focused. So we look at, what 3 to 4 exercises we can do a year that allow us to shape the training objectives, get lessons learned out of them for ourselves, and also provide training to others. And we'll continue to stay at that. We just can't do one a month. It's more like one a quarter to be focused and do them correctly. And in the past, PKSY had done PSOTU, if people are familiar with that term, event in the spring, and then another like strategic seminar in the fall. We're looking at trying to do, just given our size, one big event a year where we bring together the right folks from around the world to get after a stabilization or peacekeeping operations issue. So more to follow as we work that out and put out the details on what we'll be pushing for this fall. But I know I've rambled there a lot going on, and there's a lot more I could have covered, but really appreciate the time from the CAA and getting the word out on PKSY. We're a resource for practitioners in the field, and our aim to be that. So with that, Dennis, I'll pass it back to you. Over.
Thanks, Jay. Before I move on to Aaron, though, I do have two questions related to the JIASIC course that were in the chat. One, how long is the course? And two, where can we find details on it? Over.
No, great question. Sorry, I didn't cover that. JIASIC is a mixed course where it's 6 weeks of distance learning. Pretty rigorous. That was feedback we got from this class that went through, that it was considerable amount of work, but there's a lot of detail to cover in those 6 weeks. And then it culminates with a 1 week in residence portion at Carlisle Barracks, which we just executed the last week of October, where there's a couple days of, seminar and discussion, and then work through a scenario that forces teams comprised of DOS, USAID, and DOD working as a team to think through and plan against various challenges that pop up in the scenario. What was the second part, Dennis?
Where can you find details on the course?
Okay, we will be putting information right now. It had gone out through to get the seats filled for DOD, DOS, and USAID, and went through the respective. It actually went out as a joint staff push to down through the force. To sum it up, what we owe everyone is a place on our website that details it and tracks it, and we're working through that now. Over.
Right, Jay, thanks. And there'll be more questions and answers following Stefan. So now we'll go ahead and move on to Mr. Aaron Weiss. Aaron, glad you could join us with the Marine Corps.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the lead in. So I have a couple slides. I'll go through them pretty quickly so we can get right to the questions and answers. So Marine Corps Civil Affairs is a little bit different, as the community knows, from big Army Civil Affairs, soft Civil Affairs, or Reserve Civil Affairs. We've gone through a number of changes trying to lean forward into the OIE and information warfare, and our kind of place in that role and our integration with other capability sets. Next slide. So I fall under DCI, the Deputy Commandant for Information, and go right into the next slide, sir. Information Warfare Maneuver Division is where I hang my hat. So I fall in the readiness section, but we have some civil affairs folks in our integration support section, which is kind of our wargaming area as a whole. Next slide. So recently we had the Marine Corps Doctrinal Pub for Information published, MCDP 8, which is one of our top tier pubs. In there, wanted to share it with the community, kind of how we're getting after information as a force, getting after the information advantage, and focus on those main three aspects of systems overmatch, prevailing narrative, and force resiliency. Now, on the basic forefront, the way they're looking at it is the system overmatch is a little bit more cyber heavy, a little bit more tech heavy. Prevailing narrative, really kind of public affairs, getting that message out, while they have the influence capabilities, us and PSYOPs kind of falling in that force resiliency aspects with the mis and disinformation counterparts. But if you look at the actual definitions of the way everything's kind of laid out, I see civil affairs forces kind of falling into all three of those areas. Getting at some of the conversations from our key speaker earlier with that network analysis, network engagement aspect, that really kind of falls into that system overmatch for our commanders. Being a civil affairs force, being able to do that while also pushing out the narrative that commander or that operation has at that lowest ground level. And then the force resiliency, of course, with being engaged in our civil networks gets at that force resiliency. Next slide. So this is kind of where we're falling into the next aspect of working doctrine in that information maneuver, how that falls within the maneuver aspect and the fires aspect, and really looking at it from a combined arms perspective. In the next couple of months, there's going to be a lot of work done on a warfighting pub for information, where some of the stuff that we're working, Information Maneuver Division and our Civil Affairs School, McMoss, that's recently started to work on upgrading and updating the Civil Affairs Marine Corps pubs. If you've had an opportunity, they have a very good amount of circulars that they developed, and we're going to be taking those as our baseline, kind of reworking them a little bit internally, but we will have 3 pubs at the end that we're going to be pushing out. A tactical pub for CMO, a reference pub for civil affairs operations, and a reference pub for CA planning. Hope to have all 3 of those done before May of next year, even through staffing and all of that, and signed. But because our process now for anything under a warfighting pub, we can have it signed by a 06, we can go and relook at those every couple of years and adjust those a little bit faster than we used to be able to. But that's also going to get at providing some of the information on how we're going to be doing information maneuver, information fires in the inform and influence capability sets for the warfighting pub for this, for the information space, and also looking at some of the other material that was mentioned previously. Next slide. So this is really kind of getting at, who Marine Corps Civil Affairs falls into, because Mr. Holchek mentioned that these will be available later. I won't go into it, but the main parts, but really that civil reconnaissance, civil engagement aspects, we're going to have that a little bit more fleshed out in that CAO pub that we're going to be developing. Really messaging not only the Marine Corps, but our joint community on, hey, this is kind of where the Civil Affairs Force falls as a whole. There's been some thought of, oh, they're just a stab force and they're just going to be there to do some cleanup work. We're really kind of pushing a little bit more forward on, hey, if we're doing recon, counter recon, or we're doing expeditionary basing, hey, the civil affairs folks need to be there to start doing that network analysis, network engagements. They need to get there to try to mitigate any material that our adversaries is putting out there in real time, so that we can avoid anything, conflict or any miscommunication with our partner communities. So next slide. So obviously we lost out in the 2025. We lost a full civil affairs group and we lost our active duty component. So we really had to look at what we needed to do to maintain relevancy, maintain the force we had, because even those civil affairs groups that survived lost Marines. And it's been hard to kind of recruit to a capability set that doesn't have as many opportunities, even though after commanders use our capability, they go, oh, this is a great one, and I need this for future fights. So we looked at what we needed to do. Next slide. Here's the way our active component kind of sits right now. It's really small. But what we did gain from this, from the Force Development 2030, was those places in the yellow, those Marine littoral regiments. Those are just small teams, but it was at least a gain. 24 packs in structure, but now we kind of have to figure out with that doctrine we're talking about on how we can make sure that the reserve component, the active component, kind of gets at the future fight. And we'll get into next slide. So that gets us into the big nuts and bolts of what's happened with us is we looked and created a 17XX information maneuver OC field. So within that has cyber aspects, space aspects, but the big one for us was the influence MOS. Now this applies currently only to the active component structure in our civil affairs community. And they are going to be falling into the 17XX number for the 1751 and the 1707. In next FY, our reserve component will also fall into the 17XX reserve component. Reserve numbers will change from currently an 0530 and 0532 into a 1730, 1732. And we had to break it out. That was coming from higher, even though we want to do it all at one time. It was just the logistics behind it had to kind of go active component first, then reserve, unfortunately. But within that, what we're actually getting is a professionalized active component force. Right now we have our PSYOPers that are also kind of being blended into this. So our 1707s and our 1751s are going to be our PSYOP community and our civil affairs capability together. They are going to be billet MOSs as a civil affairs Marine or a PSYOP Marine. Understanding the authorities that they fall into are going to be different when they're in those billets. But it's going to be no longer a free MOS on our active component side where we have to retrain active component members every couple of years. Now it will just be a standard MOS attrition rate going into the future. Give us a full, keep getting back to the professionalization port, which is something that's just really huge because we've been trying to do it for years. And some of the Marines that we had in our previously free MOS situations would call us after a couple months and say, I really want to stay in this MOS. I really want to stay here. And we say, hey, you're welcome to, but understand you're never going to get promoted again. You're never going to get promoted again. And your career is basically over, unfortunately. So this actually gets away from that. We're going to be able to have these Marines really in place from corporal and sergeant on the enlisted side, captain on the officer side. So we'll be a moving MOS. You have to kind of go through screening. And right now, the screening process for both of them is sitting at about 40%. That's before they go off and do training. Now, with that, it is giving us the time to do some interviews with these individuals, make sure that they're coming with the right mindset. They're coming with the right personal skills that we need to have somebody go out there and be alone and unafraid in some of these situations. So there's a lot going on that we're going to be doing with the reserve side. It is going to fall to 1730, 1732 as the initial part. And then hopefully, in the next 10 years, with all the 1707, 1751s that are out there, some opportunities for our reserve Marines to attend the active courses. Mostly the PSYOP course is the PSYOP screening one is the big one. That might lead to a different look at the CAGs as a whole. And, do they all of a sudden become 1707, 1751 just because of the mass numbers of Marines that are out there? Another bonus that's coming out of this is within the reserve component, we're upgrading the security clearances to match what is already required for our active component members now with the PSYOP MOS. So coming into next year, they will also be upgraded across the board for a number of billets. But right now, it's only sitting at 3 or 4 per CAG. This will increase them almost more than 400 or 500%. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but mostly any senior staff NCO and the majors and above are going to get it, and then some of those other billets below that, depending on the billet title as a whole. But this will give them the ability to really get at the planning aspects that have been wholly missing from our community. Because it was a free MOS, there was no security clearance requirement. And because it mostly felt in the reserves, they were falling behind. They were showing up at the 11th hour for most missions. and weren't able to be in the room actually doing some of the planning, which was a massive issue. So this is going to get after that as well. Next slide. That's just the overall information on them, kind of the examination of them. One thing that came up during this whole process, though, that we wanted to kind of get ahead of for the community. One of the comments that came out was, if these Marines are seen as influence Marines, which is their main code set, as you can see there, would they be seen as influencers, or would they be seen as civil affairs Marines? The counterpoint to that was, when our counterparts in the soft civil affairs community show up to someplace, are they seen as soft or are they seen as CA? So we kind of posed that question up to a couple State Department reps that we had contact with, and they came back and said, no, you're going to be seen as Marines, and then you're going to have to tell us what you're going to be performing in that country anyway. And if you break that, we'll just kick you out. Okay, so if you're falling under the civil affairs authorities, you're going to be doing civil affairs activities. If you're falling under the PSYOP role in that same kind of field, then hey, that's what you're going to be doing. Do we anticipate that there'll be someone who screws up and does some PSYOP in a civil affairs position? Yeah, that's definitely going to happen. But we have to mitigate that, and with the understanding that that person's career will be done. There's no leeway. There's no little bit of leeway for it. You broke with the authorities that you were there for. You're out of the country. You're done. And it fell on you. But we get that with the screening we're going through, that 40%, like I said, where you're getting top tier Marines that are coming into this. Not someone who's looking for an opportunity for promotion, but somebody who's looking for an actual opportunity to do solid work for the capability and for the fight coming in the future. Next slide, please. This is just getting at the way that progression is. As you can see, they've got the training, and this happens for both the next slide as well, where you have the PSYOP course, the civil affairs course, and then MOPSI as that initial training pipeline. And then when you go up to the 1708, which is the planners MOS, they go through that planners course. But then we have a professional force. Again, next slide. Same thing with our enlisted Marines coming in at that corporal rank, sergeant rank, then going through the chief's course, the planners course, and finally getting up to that master guns level, which we've created a couple extra ones of those in the active component, or at least now we'll have that skill set at the active component in the master gun slot. Next slide, please. That's all I have, and I turn back over to Mr. Cahill.
Thanks, Aaron. You generated some questions here, but again, we'll hold them off to the end.
Sir.
So let's get to Lieutenant Colonel Stefan Muehlich, who I understand is dialing in from Berlin, Germany. Stefan, your mic, over.
That's correct. Good evening from Berlin. Just a second confirmation that you hear and maybe also see me well.
Your picture and your voice are coming in clear. Yes.
That's good. So yeah, thank you for giving me again the opportunity to brief on some initiatives, especially that we monitor from our Center of Excellence. I again want to stress at the beginning that I'm not mandated and not capable to speak officially for overall NATO. This is a CIMIC Center of Excellence point of view and not a NATO official point of view. Secondly, let me stress that I see a lot of the initiatives that have been briefed so far are quite in line with what's going on in NATO. Overall, you know that we have a new strategic concept after endorsed in the Madrid summit this summer that reiterated the 3 core tasks of NATO and just renamed the first one for deterrence and defense, and not simply defense. So NATO is adapting to the continuum of competition and the conflict that we have below the threshold of armed and war. Mentioned several times already last year in my briefing, the NATO warfighting capstone concept, which has been published by the Allied Command for Transformation end of 21. And there are several deliverables dropping out that NATO warfighting capstone concept, which is a multi-domain operation concept currently in development, where we are contributing. No, one slide back, I'm still in the generic intro. Thank you, sorry. Multi-domain operation concept for NATO, interesting from a CIMIC perspective, as they mention command, control, and consultation, and with that they mean the interaction with non-military actors, especially private companies that have capabilities beyond military capabilities. As an example, SpaceX or Microsoft. From our doctrinal point of view, this should be CIMIC. There's no need to reinvent the wheel with a new term. But yeah, we will see how successful we are. We contribute to the cognitive superiority and the cognitive warfare concept, and we contribute to a layered resilience concept. This is all under development. The big picture for NATO. One remark on the big picture, I can see the trend as in, for example, as Aaron just briefed for the Marine Corps, that in many NATO nations, CIMIC is reduced to a non-kinetic effector, and by that put in one basket with info ops and psyops, and from our point of view loses a big selling point that we have. And I want to elaborate on that with the example of the new NATO agreed definitions for CIMIC, civil military cooperation, and CMI, civil military interaction. Those definitions are supposed to appear in the new NATO policy for CIMIC and CMI, which is in the final status of ratification, which means that it is discussed between the nations in the military committee. And unfortunately, we have two allies who have a significant debate, not about CIMIC or CMI related content, but a paragraph that refers to political restrictions, how the alliance allows NATO's CIMIC to occur. There is one ally that is very restrictive about that and wants political mandate and under political control explicitly mentioned. And another ally that is strongly against that. And they are breaking the silent procedure for more than a year now. So unfortunately, I cannot tell you, yeah, MC411/3 is short to be ratified and endorsed. We don't know when it will happen. Fortunately, the definitions for CIMIC and CMI were taken in a separate process in the standardization board, and nations were able to agree on those. And I will elaborate on them on the next slides. Next slide. And hit one more. This is the new NATO term agreed in August this year. I give you a few seconds to read it, and then I will go through it step by step. Next slide. So we are talking about a military joint function that integrates the understanding of the civil factors of the operating environment. I think this is a parallel to civil knowledge integration, civil reconnaissance, so the analytical part. And this is, from our point of view, one of the two core activities that drops out of this definition. And that is more or less neglected when CIMIC capabilities are put in one basket with InfoOps and PsyOps. Next slide. So different than in the US framework, in the NATO framework, civil military cooperation, you see it in the blue circle in the bottom left, is a joint function. A joint function that by actions tries to influence and create effects. And you see that there is a separation between civil military cooperation and information, and quite similar to you then maneuver and fires. On the top, you see that they are informed and directed by command and control and intelligence, and supported by sustainment and force protection. So from our point of view, this joint function framework is a bit outdated when we apply the new definition of CIMIC. Next slide. Again, as a repetition, the effects, causes, effectors, CIMIC is one of them. Next slide. But when we see CIMIC analysis and assessment with CIMIC advice, the overall process throughout is called CIMIC estimate in our doctrine, but with making analysis and assessment and giving advice. Next slide. We see ourselves more in the top row, at least with this core activity, with intelligence and command and control, that we inform and direct effectors, that we help with the analysis and assessment of the civil environment, with the integration of the understanding of the civil environment, that we help to take better decisions and give better tasks and orders to the effectors. Next slide. The second core activity, enable, facilitate, and conduct civil military interaction. And to understand what that means, you need, of course, the definition for civil military interaction. Therefore, next slide. You see that it's NATO military bodies with non-military actors, any activity to foster mutual understanding and enhance effectiveness and efficiency in crisis management, conflict prevention, and resolution. Next slide. New reality for civil military interaction or old reality, I would say, back to the roots. When we talk about deterrence and defense, and we talk about the employment of NATO elements to allied nations, then we see civil military interaction not only happening from commanders to non-military actors, or from staff elements to non-military actors, but often there are caveats by allied nations that NATO CIMIC elements are not allowed to interact with non-military actors, governmental organizations, administrative organizations of that host nation directly, but they have to go through the CIMIC elements, the J9 of those host nation military. Still, we see that as a form of civil military interaction, just with the difference that it's not conducted directly, but respecting the sovereignty of the host nation. Next slide. So here is an example. It's an extract from the HAP 319 Allied Joint Publication for CIMIC and CMI, where we depict the different levels of interaction. You see on the left side from a fully integrated, co-located aspect to the right side getting weaker, where we have to use national military actors as an interlocutor. There is a discussion ongoing whether we have to mention civil-military liaison as whether we have to keep that as a core activity in our former definitions and in our former doctrine. Civil-military liaison was one of the core functions of CIMIC. We think in our house at least, and we also think we have good arguments for that, that civil-military interaction covers civil-military liaison, and civil-military liaison is just a specified and qualified version of CMI. Next slide. This is something maybe hard to understand for you, but this is a result of 30 nations sitting around the table with one vote each, and that they have to come to unanimous decisions. We wanted to open the focus, not limited on missions and out-of-area operations as it was in the past. We wanted to make the definition applicable throughout the continuum of competition. I think what we ended up was a partial success, at least. We still have the word missions in it, but we also have military strategic objectives in peacetime crisis and conflict. And by that, we see this continuum of competition fully covered, as we have already vigilance activities in the northeast and southeast that are ongoing, and they are military strategic objectives. So we have I would say a green light to conduct CIMIC throughout the competition continuum. Next slide. Yeah, this is just a draft. We want to develop a poster, which is CIMIC in a nutshell. We will be happy to share this with you and to walk you through this in CIMIC courses. And I want to mention here that we have developed in the framework of our interoperability project between NATO CIMIC and US Civil Affairs. We have developed a familiarization course for US Civil Affairs to learn more about NATO CIMIC. We have conducted several iterations, and there are more planned, and we want to institutionalize this. We are in contact with US Army Europe Africa to make this mandatory for civil affairs teams that deploy to NATO countries in Europe. Next slide. One remark on cross-cutting topics. You see them listed in the bottom right. Some of them were mentioned earlier, like women, peace and security, or protection of civilians. A milestone that they made the shift from AJP 319, Allied Joint Publication for CIMIC, to AJP 01, the Allied Joint Doctrine. This is the cornerstone doctrine. And by that, we really make it not a CIMIC topics, but really cross-cutting topics relevant for all joint functions and all staff functions. Next slide. A big buzzword in NATO. Sorry, I missed the headline to write out the acronym. HSIO is Human Security in Operations. very dynamic developments in that emerging topic. It is officially mentioned in the report of the summit in Madrid this summer. Human security in operations will be an umbrella for other cross-cutting topics. Don't try to understand the slide, just try to understand that we currently have a mess that AJP 01 covers different cross-cutting topics than the HSIO directive that was drafted by Shape J9. And we will see in the upcoming months and few years developments in that. And we expect human security to be a term that can't longer be ignored. Next slide. Protection of civilians in the spotlight. It was mentioned earlier. We have been informed about the Civil Harm Mitigation Response Action Plan from August this year of the US Department of Defense. And at the more or less a few weeks later, there was a B Strategic Command Directive published. The two strategic commands are ACT in Norfolk and Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in Mons, Belgium. And the Shape commander Secure is double-headed, and at the same time the commander of US EUCOM. So important directive. We have contracted an expert. I think most of you know him very well, Dr. Nicholas Crowley, to write a comparison of those documents after we have finalized our generic doctrine comparison between US Civil Affairs and NATO CIMIC. We thought it would be a good effort to do that on that specific doctrine as well. Next slide. Yeah, just as a teaser, we want to create your appetite about that, and we will be happy to share that with the civil affairs community after we have finalized it. We expect that to happen by mid-December, so end of the year. The paper should be available. Next slide. One visible success and progress in our synchronization project with US Civil Affairs is the fact that we, since July, have a permanent liaison officer, for the moment restricted to 1 year, but the intent is to extend that for another year, and the overall intent is to make the United States of America a sponsoring nation of the Civic Center of Excellence, so that we have a permanent and official representation of the United States, and by that a better synchronization and a institutionalized synchronization between the US capability and the NATO joint function. And I want to use that to thank everybody who was involved to make that happen. And we are looking forward on continuing that effort. Next slide. Back to you, Dennis.
Stefan, thank you very much, as always. Appreciate your participation today. I know you're going to have another one later, but and we do have a couple of questions for you, but I'll get to those in turn. We have about 15 minutes for the question and discussion portion, and I first wanted to start with Dr. Pete Griffith, who provided a question on the last session to when General Beaupere was speaking. And Pete, you asked about how is SWCS working with PKSOI to achieve the broader education and training for the civil affairs enterprise. I know Colonel Liddick spoke to that. Did he answer your query, or do you have any follow-up on that? Over.
No, Colonel Liddick answered it. It was more to hear from General Beauclair more than it is to hear from Colonel Liddick.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So if Steve's still on, Steve had a question. I'll let you ask it if you want, Steve Ferenzi. It has to do with the concepts and force structure or manning challenges. So Steve, go ahead. Over. Steve, can you unmute or? All right, I'll go ahead and read it then. He asked, how does all of the proposed CA force structure and doctrine align to OSD and SOCOM's Special Operations Forces Operating Concept 2040? Headquarters DA's voracious appetite for manpower, especially cyber EW, to fill maneuver divisions and corps, and the reality of building manning challenges across USASOC. So I'll answer the first question, the first part of that, and then turn it over to Dr. Walsh for the second. In the Civil Affairs Capability Manager division, we have a concepts developer position currently filled by Major Todd McDaniel. Todd works very closely with Dr. Bob Taguchi and the USASOC Force Modernization Center's CDID, the Capability Development Integration Division's concepts development folks. And so we're very, very well tied into concept development, both at USASOC and SOCOM, and of course, as well as Army. So I would say that we are very well tied in there. We're in the process of writing several concept documents and integrating civil affairs into the concept doctrine developments documents of Army, SOCOM, and USASOC. And Dr. Walsh, you work very closely with Headquarters DA and USASOC on the structure more so than the manpower piece, but can you address that second half? Over.
Sure, Dennis. So with regards, I'm going to take it in two pieces. One, dealing with the FDU itself, and then two, getting to the headquarters, the Theater Army Corps and Division headquarters. So for the FDU, that is a restructure of U.S. Army Reserve Civil Affairs Force structure using an internal bill paying strategy. Basically, we are reallocating the existing 7,300 or so spaces across the force. There's no loss of existing authorizations, and therefore there's no growth either. But what we are doing is we're inactivating 4 battalions. And by doing so, that provides 812 authorizations that we can reallocate to redesign and provide supported commanders the capacity to plan, enable, shape, and manage strategic to tactical level civil affairs operations across the competition continuum. And this will enhance the commander's situational understanding of the human, information, and physical dimensions of the civil component and improve his overall decision superiority. And but it also, by doing so, we're actually growing team size. We're growing from 4-man teams to 8-man teams. A civil affairs company is growing from 32 to 34 soldiers. A battalion, that's where we see the largest growth. They're growing from 75 to 98 soldiers. The brigade grows from 110 to 117 soldiers, and the KCOM grows from 197 to 200. But again, this is an internal bill paying strategy. With regards to your second part of the question about Theater Army Corps and Division headquarters, that is separate from internal to Compo 3, the Reserve Civil Affairs Force structure. And that growth is actual growth in Compo 1 authorizations that the Army is authorizing. And they're using a bill payer strategy. Unfortunately, in a sense, the inactivation of the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion, our conventional force Compo 1 battalion, they're kind of sort of a bill payer for some of these authorizations. But the couple positive things that are coming from that. Number one, we are reestablishing the Division Civil Affairs G9 sections that we lost with the FARG 2 redesign that occurred a couple years ago. So that is a huge victory for our ability to plan civil affairs operations and to conduct civil affairs operations with the division as that unit of execution across during LISCO. At the core level, we're growing between 4 and 7 positions. Right now, they're still trying to resolve what the actual growth is. And at the theater army level, the three theater armies that are looking at growth are U.S. Army, Indo-PACOM, whatever, however you say that. I don't know, it's USARPAC, but it's Indo-PACOM, and then U.S. Army Europe, Africa, and U.S. Army North. We're growing authorizations at each of those theater army headquarters. And again, that is a bill payer strategy that the Army will provide those Compo 1 authorizations. So hopefully that answered your question. And if you need me to elaborate any further, let me know.
Thanks, Dale. And stand by. I've got another question that you will probably need to weigh in along with Al De Vera. And in the interest of time, again, I'll read the questions as and hopefully the questioners won't mind that. This is from Colonel Tony Vaha. Has the proponent considered a different name for functional specialty cells? Military government denotes specific context, occupation. We found his application for functional specialists outside of occupational requirements. Military government can label this capability when working with certain partners. So Al, since it's we'll talk to the doctrine piece to you, over.
Yeah, Dennis, no, really has not been looked at. I mean, we kind of shy away from naming specific things, but really just describing the capability that we're shooting at. So if we're still meeting the capability, I mean, we can call it whatever we want, but we'd rather bank on the time and effort on describing the capability.
It's the same thing for the Marine Corps, where we have the influence MOS spots. We used to have the functional specialists in our reserve component. And after a while, it was kind of hard to put some individuals in those places, especially when we had generalists. So we ended up scrapping them and just having civil affairs planners in our G9 with the kind of the background thought of, hey, if I need an education specialist, I'm still going to be applying that. That also led to a skills tracker program that the Marine Corps implemented that was really looking at, if a unit goes and all of a sudden you find out that your motor T chief has a master's degree in education, which there's actually a couple of them out there, which is kind of fun. Can you take that person and use them ad hoc to kind of support? It wasn't just looking at falling in the civil affairs realm, but it kind of worked in that space. Over.
Hey, Dennis, if I could,
Yeah.
with regards to the FDU, so we have renamed those functional specialty cells. And if you remember, when I gave that quick, overview of the FDU, we dissolved the functional specialty cells, and we established at the battalion and brigade levels, we established military government teams. At the battalion levels, those military government teams consist solely of 38 Gulfs, our military government officers that General Beaupere spoke quite eloquently about in his keynote address. At the brigade level, yeah.
Well, Dale, I was just going to offer to you, hey, we're working this problem in a European security context. So specifically, we're using our functional specialists to help design the scenario for Defender 23, which is a very unique application, right? But it has nothing to do. So I guess we can acknowledge the role and function of U.S. law and policy in occupation, but I think we run the potential in certain security contexts of one, either we're describing this very awkwardly so that when they work with NATO allies, for example, we're not sending military government people to Hungary, right? I think we just need to think more strategically in the employment of this capability, functional specialists writ large, not just 38 Gulf, the other members of our teams. so that we're not constraining the thinking about them. That was the point I was trying to raise. Over.
Hey, that's a really good point. Recently, myself and a couple of other team members got to go to a war game, and see how different capabilities are able to provide different analysis on the information that's been provided in various scenarios. If we just regulate it to a functional specialty team to look at a problem set, then you're restricting yourself. When you're bringing in other capability sets to come in and have these discussions, then you're actually showing value added as a group think situation to a commander. That's kind of the way we've gone, and it's shown that we've actually been able to gain a little bit of ground when losing people in 2025, and hopefully gaining more with the next iteration of force development. Over.
All right, thanks, guys, and thanks, Tony. I think obviously this will be on our to-do list, and we look forward to working with you offline on this particular topic. So moving on, this is from Basir Rayat, and I think he's asking, will the Protection of Civilians Center of Excellence eventually join the NATO COE network? He's referring to the Protection of Civilians Center of Excellence that was directed by the DoD Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response Plan. And right now, I can tell you that the Protection of Civilians COE is still, the Army has been directed to stand it up. Trade-off's got the lead, along with what's called the use of PHMSA force management and force management folks to develop that. And I don't believe initial operational capability will be until sometime next year. And there'll be some refinement in what that COE consists of structure-wise. We are actually participants in developing that particular structure. But I don't know for sure once it's stood up, and it may not be for another year and a half, if it'll join the COE network of NATO. Colonel Liddick, do you have any insight on that? Over.
Hey, Dennis, I would just, I think you nailed it. I would say that's probably a potentiality in the future. They're just not there yet. Over.
Check. All right. Thank you. Moving on here. Okay, Tony, your hand's still up, and this is Colonel Vaha, and you also had a question for Aaron about the Marine Corps. Did you want to address that, or did he respond already? Over.
Dennis, thanks. He did in terms of U.S. partners, but I think there's a broader potential question on if you're mixing influence and information capabilities. I guess my question wasn't necessarily in partners with U.S. government, but more with indigenous populations and institutions. Over.
Yeah, so I pulled up the actual definitions that we have right now that we're kind of aligning to, just so I'm reading directly from them. Now, with that being said, these are always living, they're always being reworked. They're not, they're hard set at the time, but if we screw something up, we definitely go back and rework them. So for informed domestic and international audiences, it's actions taken to inform, and I'll drop in the chat for people, actions taken to inform domestic and international audiences in order to build understanding and support of Operations Institute objectives, use accurate, timely information and visual media to counter disinformation, correct misinformation, and put MAGTF, Marine Corps, operations activities and policies in context to internal US and foreign audiences through a variety of media and face-to-face engagements. Then for influence, and there's a whole bunch of different groups that are kind of tacked into that, but then for influence, actions taken to accordance with approved authorities to influence select foreign audiences and affect their decision-making behaviors in order to create conditions favorable for Marine Corps objectives. Successful influence operations rely on understanding and consideration of target audience and their associated social, cultural, political, economic, and organizational rules, norms, and beliefs. This understanding allows the MAGTF to effectively evaluate target audience behavior in context and anticipate target audience decision makers and endeavors to influence the will and decisions of relevant population. So, those are the hardline definitions. Even though we have those as Marine Corps tasks, MCDP 8, which was what the document I was talking about, didn't go into the nuance of those things. Yes, they do sound a lot like IO, but that was the core of where OIE came from. It was, how do we redefine IO so it doesn't have the stink of IO? Because if we tell everyone that cyber is doing IO and space is an IO, and it just gets convoluted. But within this influence capability, influence foreign target audience, we've looked at how to use space in that capability. How do you use the hard science, EMSO? How do you look at signature management? How do you do those other things that are not just a PSYOP kind of job, and bring those other mindsets in the room and go, okay, cyber, if I do this activity with you, here's that information that is I can provide to the commander in that space. Getting back to MCDP 8, we didn't define how we would actually work those things. Influence wasn't really addressed in that 3 main areas of resilience, overmatch, and narrative. Narrative was there, but it's really just informed PAO stuff. It's not, what are you actually trying to get out of anybody? It's missing a lot of context, but that's okay, because those MCDPs are philosophical level documents. The McWhip that's going to be created will have a little bit more granularity that I think the force needs to provide on how, to the commander and to the joint community, on how we're getting at that stuff as a whole. Over.
Aaron, thanks. And I'm actually a little bit over my allotted time, but I want to entertain 2 more quick questions, Chris Hoshek, if you don't mind. One is from, again, Basir Rayet. And Basir, I know you posed this question both to Mr. Weiss and Colonel Muehlich, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask Lieutenant Colonel Muehlich to answer. And the question has to do with regarding Russian Wagner Group and the Chinese rogue and illegal law enforcement activity. Is this changing civil affairs in CIMIC, or in your case, CIMIC? Over.
So I think it creates an argument to have more of our capability involved and forward pressed. You want them out there to be able to reduce the ground that these illegal, or these how do we describe them? These proxy forces are actually out there. If they're not able to gain ground in an area, then maybe we're actually, by having our connections and having our civil affairs community out there, they're not able to get that foothold. I mean, it's stuff that has to be kind of worked out, war games, and see how that goes forward.
Thank you. Basir, did you have something else? Over.
I know, just a very quick, just basically nefarious actors, wild cards, because they are in the equation, and they're trying to move as fast as possible, trying to look for our vulnerabilities. And with the Chinese, I was hunting a lot of Chinese tourists and basically unmasking them and so forth. And these days, it turns out they were law enforcement in reality. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you very much, Mr. Weiss.
Hey, Dennis, Jay here, if I can jump in on that, just,
yes, Jay.
Great points. And I will say that that's something that, we're obviously aware of and tracking at PKSY, but it's also, the nefarious actor piece has not escaped AFCC. And as they look at how we position ourselves Army-wise for 2040, over.
Roger. And again, I think it speaks to the importance of, because someone made a comment here, speaks to the importance of training our folks and more presence, having presence out there in those various places where those nefarious actors are, so that we can develop the plans to counter those activities. Chris Holshek, I'm going to leave it. There are several other questions that I apologize we cannot get to, but Chris Holshek, you had one last question before you turn us off to the over to the next session. Over.
Dennis, thanks very much. And this has been a really great discussion. I'm just going to pick up where I left off with General Beaupere. And that is that this idea of, you know, it's becoming very obvious that through this very last piece of the discussion and the things I mentioned with General Beaupere about our strategies and so on beginning to really align, and the even higher demand signal for integration, even within the integrated deterrence concept with our allies and partners. And so how's that going to reflect? What's the proponent thinking in terms of, and in fact, even this includes the Marine Corps. How are we going to, from the doctrinal side and from the training side, raise the level of situational awareness and situational understanding of the CA community, the CA Corps, with regard to our CIMIC partners, other than just what we're doing now? How are we going to raise it to the next level?
Chris, I can tell you that SWCS and the CIMIC COE have gotten together in the last few months, and our good friend Chava, remember Savo? He was here. Yeah, he was here a few months ago, providing a training event to selected individuals from the 95th CA Brigade and others on CIMIC, and it was very well run and very well received, and I hope that continues. I'll let either Aldevera or Stefan respond further. Over.
Yeah, so this is Aldevera. I mean, just to ride your short tails. Yes, so increasing interaction just within the last 12 months with CIMIC visits through here, through, you know, with MTTs, working and engagements with our doctrine writers on where we can find commonalities and definitions. Same thing with the, I think there was also a question there on interoperability and sharing with the Marine Corps Center of Excellence as they're writing their doctrine. It's just in its infancy, but we saw the benefits, of course, when the Navy MCAS or MCATs were actually active in the Indo-PACOM region. We see that as being invaluable and needs to be replicated again and tested at the CTCs to show value added to maneuver commander when there's transition between services and meeting the commander's objectives and consolidating gains. So it's just in its infancy, but yes, we see the definite need to ensure that it's codified in doctrine. So it, you know, we can actually refer back to, you know, hey, this is how we refer, this is how it occurs operationally, and then replicated during CTCs, and then of course, like operationally, once deployed.
Hey, Dennis, if I could real quick, I would assert that we need to extend this beyond just, you know, integration, you know, the magic I3 interoperable integration and interdependent with Marine Corps and CIMIC. This should be more of a global perspective of how we counter Russian Wagner groups and what the Chinese are doing, because they don't see trans-regional or geographic combatant commander type boundaries. Their actions are global, and that's how we have to start envisioning things. And tying it back to what General Beaupere said this morning with regards to CEOs, our primary adversary, first of all, you know, let's remember, and this is not to insult anybody, Sun Tzu is the one who said win without fighting, right? So our primary adversary's perspective is to win without fighting. So how do we counter that? You know, and they take a whole of nation approach where we consistently say whole of government. So we have to truly open our aperture, one, to a more whole of nation perspective, and two, a more global perspective to get after some of these adversarial actions. Over.
Can't agree more with what you just said, Dale. And that's kind of what my question is pointing to, is when are we going to see something in FM 3-57 about CIMIC how we do the 3 I's with all those different partners, not just NATO CIMIC, but UN CIMIC. How do we create that global civil military network we talked about, in the last year? And how does that also reflect in training? We got the USAJFKSWCS coming up next. How are we going to be able to reach to their soldiers and make sure that they at least know what CIMIC means and know how these guys operate? So they don't just walk into Europe or someplace in some region and have absolutely no understanding of who these guys are and how they operate.
So this is Al again in CA doctrine. FM 357 describes these organizations, of course, as transitional governance, the other TGs, other ATPs get drafted, will get more and more finite in describing how our operational force will engage in a multinational context. I think one quick things that we could do is, update those GTAs, graphical training aids, to actually get something to our operational force for quick references. I think an example for the airlift in Afghanistan was cited in the previous session. What I received from Colonel Pogge was they pulled out Populace and Resource Control, ATP, and the GTAs for quick references for all those interagencies that were supporting that airlift. So yeah, once in a rush and it's a crisis, folks will fall back on those doctrinal manuals. So we have a responsibility. My division has a responsibility to make sure those things are updated.
Yeah, but let's real quick be honest though. Like you talk about worldwide staffing, the Marine Corps gets those pubs after they're signed in most cases. I've created a very large community of interest that I will share all my information with outside of regular staffing, so that I can have an actual worldwide staffing of the community. And have been very honest about that every time I've briefed this group. But yet, I have not seen that from the other side. We've reached out multiple times saying, please let us, be part of these group activities, these pubs that are reaching across the joint community, yet they only maybe hit McMoss and they don't hit our units that are actually doing the work in real time.
Roger. My contact information is on my slides. Please reach out to me and we'll add you to our distro list if it's not
I'll
getting
give
to
you
you.
a whole group of individuals to add to that list as well. Over.
Yes, sir. No, that'll work. And then, and let me also caveat on here. It's not only CA relevant doctrinal manual that we need to have those hooks in. FM 3-16 from multinational operations also has some, characterization of what we execute needs to also be in there, and they are. You'll see FM 3-16 published in the next couple of months, and civil mil integration is in there. Go ahead.
300%.
Yeah, if I could, this is also where, and I know Colonel Micah Baker's not on the line, but this also is where we can leverage SOCOM as the joint proponent, because they are the interlocutor, right? They're the ones that really should be able to, or really should be getting after this from a joint perspective. Over.
Yeah, Roger all, and unfortunately we're pretty much out of time. We're actually 15 minutes over what Chris Hoschek recommended we go for this particular session, but it proves obviously there's a lot of interest and in our topic, and we will come back again in the at the roundtable to update everybody on if we made any strides. Hopefully we will, based on today's conversation. So Colonel Hoschek, over to you. Over.
Thanks, Dennis, for putting this together, and thanks for an absolutely fantastic job, everybody, with your inputs. And the discussion was just really, really solid. And looking forward to capturing that with Dennis in the report. And again, this will be posted on the a Journal YouTube channel, probably in a week or two. In the meantime, there's another link to go to, and it was posted in the chat room, but you can also get it from the message that you should have gotten for the next workshop, which should be likewise very intriguing with regard to USAJFKSWCS, the APOC commander himself. is going to be briefing us. So hopefully you'll be tuning into that and make sure that you get other people to do likewise. And then we'll finish up with the discussion about civil affairs and wargaming, which should be really interesting. And then tomorrow we open up with the interagency piece, which is, I mean, picking up on today's discussion shouldn't be even more interesting than it was when we posted it. So, and a multinational workshop as well, and the one I'm doing. So there's really lots and lots of things. Hopefully you're also going to tune into the paper discussions, because the authors are going to get a lot of great feedback from you guys to really make these papers impactful and respond to the challenge that General Beaupre laid out today. I'm going to work very closely with the authors to make sure that they respond to his call. So with that, let's close session here and reopen here shortly in the next workshop for use of KPOT. Thanks, everybody.